There is a moment that happens in certain households that outsiders never notice. A decision is being discussed. Not urgently, not emotionally, no raised voices, no excitement. Someone mentions an opportunity. It sounds profitable, it sounds impressive, it sounds fast, and someone else calmly says, "That gives up too much control." Nothing dramatic follows, no argument, no explanation. The conversation simply moves on. To most people, that sentence would sound insignificant. To a child raised in that environment, it becomes a reference point. Over time, those moments stack, not as lessons, as orientation. In families that keep wealth across generations, the most important rules are almost never announced. They are implied, modeled, repeated quietly through behavior. A child doesn't learn them from books, and they don't hear them as advice, they live inside them. By the time adulthood arrives, the rule is already installed, not memorized, internalized. The rule itself is simple, and almost never explained directly. Money is not the objective. Position is. Once this rule is absorbed, everything changes. Opportunities are no longer evaluated by how much they pay. They are evaluated by what they give up. Speed is no longer impressive by default. Visibility is no longer assumed to be beneficial. Control matters more than appearance. Access matters more than income. Leverage matters more than effort. This is the first money rule wealthy families follow. And it is the reason so many people work hard their entire lives and still feel replaceable. In most households, money is treated as the finish line. Earn more, save more, spend better, upgrade lifestyle. That belief is reinforced everywhere: schools, media, culture. But families that keep wealth do not anchor security to money. They anchor it to where they sit in the structure. Who decides? Who controls access? Who benefits even when conditions change? Money flows through structures. Position controls structures. This is why wealthy families sound different when they talk about opportunity. A parent might say something that seems harmless. The profit is fine. The problem is we won't control it anymore. That sentence alone contains the entire rule. Income without position is fragile. Ownership without control is incomplete. Money without leverage is temporary. Wealthy families understand something most people don't discover until much later. Income depends on permission. Permission from employers, permission from clients, permission from markets, permission from conditions you do not control. Position reduces permission. Ownership changes the relationship entirely. This is why wealthy families remain calm when income fluctuates. Income was never the anchor. This rule also explains something else people find confusing: why wealthy families are unimpressed by job titles. Titles exist inside systems. They disappear when systems change. Position survives disruption. A salary ends when permission is withdrawn. Ownership adapts. This is why prestige without control feels hollow in wealthy circles. Not because it's disrespected, but because it's understood. Schools cannot teach this rule, not because teachers are malicious, but because the system itself depends on compliance. The schools train people to perform well inside existing frameworks. Wealthy families train children to recognize frameworks, to see who built it, who controls it, who benefits the most from it, and then decide whether to operate inside it or build alternatives. A child raised this way learns something quietly and early. If you do not own the structure, you are inside someone else's structure. And inside someone else's structure, Your ceiling is not yours to define. This rule also explains why wealthy families discourage urgency. Urgency forces action before position is secured. Rushed decisions trade leverage for speed. Wealthy families move slowly, not because they lack ambition, but because they value asymmetry. They wait for moments where a small move creates lasting control. A quiet decision shifts long-term position. Children watch opportunities passed up, not because they weren't profitable, but because they weakened leverage. That observation installs patience without instruction. Another consequence of this rule is discretion. When position matters more than money, information becomes valuable. Plans are not announced early. Progress is not broadcast. Success is not displayed unnecessarily. Visibility attracts attention. Attention attracts interference. Interference weakens position. This is why wealthy families often appear understated, not because they lack resources, but because they understand cost. Silence preserves optionality. This rule also reshapes how risk is understood. Most people take risks hoping for big outcomes. Wealthy families take risks that cannot destroy position. They separate risk that teaches, risk that compounds, risk that destabilizes. Children raised this way do not fear failure. They fear fragility. They learn to ask one question before acting. If this fails, what do we still control? That question alone prevents irreversible mistakes. The first money rule also stabilizes identity. When money is the objective, self-worth rises and falls with outcomes. When position is the objective, identity becomes anchored. Success does not inflate. Failure does not collapse. Both are temporary. This creates adults who remain calm under pressure, not because they are emotionless, but because they are structurally secure. Most people never learn this rule. They chase income, recognition, and lifestyle, and wonder why security always feels just out of reach. Wealthy families quietly follow a different path, and they secure position first. Money follows naturally. But position, once lost, is difficult to rebuild. That is why this rule is rarely explained publicly. It only works when it is absorbed early or rediscovered deliberately. Once the rule is absorbed, behavior begins to change in ways that are difficult to notice from the outside. Nothing dramatic happens. There is no sudden transformation, no announcement, no visible shift. But decisions start to feel different. Silence appears where others would speak. Patience appears where others would rush. Restraint appears where others would react. This is not personality. It is conditioning. In households that prioritize position, silence is not awkward. It is functional. A child notices that conversations do not stretch unnecessarily, that explanations are short, that answers are precise, questions are welcomed. Noise is not. Over time, the child learns something subtle. Information has weight. Once released, it cannot be retrieved, so it is handled carefully. In most environments, speaking is encouraged. Express yourself, share your thoughts, be visible. In wealthy families, expression is contextual. They ask quietly, "What does this change if it's said? What happens if it isn't?" Silence is not treated as weakness. It is treated as optionality. When you speak less, you preserve more paths forward. This is why wealthy families are careful with visibility. Public attention feels like success to many people. Recognition, validation, status. But attention attracts forces that are not neutral. Competition notices. Imitation follows. Regulation arrives. expectations harden. Once attention is directed at you, flexibility decreases. So wealthy families become selective. They choose where to be known and where to remain invisible. A child raised in this environment does not associate silence with insignificance. They associate it with control. They grow comfortable not explaining themselves. Not because they are hiding, but because explanation is not always productive. This creates adults who are difficult to provoke, because provocation depends on reaction. Another behavioral shift appears around speed. In most households, speed is praised. Act fast, move quickly, don't miss out. In wealthy families, speed is treated with suspicion. Fast decisions often mean poor leverage, incomplete information. Emotional pressure. So delay is used deliberately, not procrastination. Timing. A child watches a parent wait while others rush, and notices something important. The person who waits often decides the terms. This is how patience becomes normal, not as virtue, as strategy. Wealthy families understand that time reveals information. Waiting costs nothing, unless you're desperate. Desperation removes bargaining power. So children are trained, quietly, to avoid urgency. Urgency is treated as a signal, not a command. Discretion extends beyond speech and speed. It applies to plans. In most lives, plans are shared early, to seek validation, to feel momentum, to be seen progressing. In wealthy families, plans are kept private until they no longer need protection, because plans change, and public plans create pressure to remain consistent, even when conditions shift. Privacy preserves adaptability. A child raised this way learns to separate progress from performance. They learn that not everything must be visible to be real. This creates confidence that is internal, not performative. They do not need applause to continue. They are not disrupted by silence from others. Another behavior shaped by the first rule is how mistakes are handled. In most environments, mistakes trigger emotion, blame, defensiveness, embarrassment. In wealthy families, mistakes are treated as events, not identities. There is disappointment, yes, but rarely panic. The question becomes, what did this reveal? What does this change? What still holds? This keeps decision-making intact. Children learn that failure is survivable, but fragility is dangerous. So systems are built to absorb error. Commitments are measured. Exposure is limited. Reputation is protected. This is why wealthy families rarely place everything on one outcome. They diversify not just assets, but dependency. This rule also shapes emotional expression. Emotions are not denied, but they are delayed. A child is allowed to feel frustration, anger, disappointment, but they observe that decisions are made later, after emotion settles, after clarity returns. This teaches one of the most valuable skills in life, the pause between feeling and acting. That pause is where power lives. As adults, this conditioning becomes visible. They do not argue publicly. They do not explain excessively. They do not rush to be understood. They allow outcomes to speak. They remain calm where others escalate. This calm is often mistaken for confidence. In reality, it is familiarity with control. On the first money rule quietly produces a second effect. It changes how relationships are evaluated. Popularity is not prioritized. Access is. Approval is not chased. Respect is. This is why wealthy families value proximity to decision-makers, not crowds. Children notice who matters in rooms, who listens, who speaks last, who moves conversations forward. They learn to observe power, not noise. By the time adulthood arrives, these behaviors feel natural. Silence, patience, discretion, timing. They are not trying to be disciplined. They are simply operating as trained. Natural pause. End of part 2. By now, the pattern should be clear. The first money rule does not just change how money is handled. It changes how time is used, how information is managed, how emotion is controlled, how decisions are structured. In families that keep wealth for a long time, the greatest fear is not failure. It is instability. This difference is subtle, but it explains almost everything about how wealth survives across generations. Failure is an event. Instability is a pattern. An event can be absorbed. A pattern compounds. Wealthy families do not design life to avoid mistakes. They design it to survive them. From an early age, children observe that losses are discussed calmly, that bad outcomes are reviewed, not dramatized, that no single decision is allowed to threaten the entire structure. This teaches a powerful lesson without words. Mistakes are expected. Collapse is unacceptable. This is why risk is handled differently. Most people treat risk as either something to avoid or something to glorify. Wealthy families do neither. They assume risk is unavoidable. So the real question becomes, what kind of risk can we survive? What kind of risk teaches us? What kind of risk ends the game? Children raised in this environment learn that not all risks are equal. Some risks expand understanding. Others narrow future options. They are taught, quietly, to avoid risks that remove leverage, reputation, or control. This creates adults who are not reckless and not timid. They are precise. Another pattern becomes clear over time. Wealthy families fear sudden change more than slow movement. Sudden change forces reaction. Reaction removes control. This is why they avoid overextension, excessive leverage. Rapid lifestyle inflation speed feels impressive to outsiders. Durability feels safe to insiders. Children notice that growth is measured, not explosive. That expansion only happens when systems are ready to support it. This creates patience that is not moral, but strategic. One of the least visible principles at work is margin. Margin is space. Space in finances, space in time, space in commitments, space in reputation. Wealthy families deliberately build margin into everything. They leave room for delays, errors, unexpected events. This margin explains why they appear calm during crises. Not because they are indifferent, but because they are prepared. Children raised with margin learn that panic is often a sign of poor structure. And they internalize the idea that calm is not a personality trait. It is the result of design. This leads to another quiet rule. Decisions are structured, so mistakes are survivable. Nothing essential depends on one fragile outcome. If a venture fails, it fails in isolation. If a relationship changes, it does not collapse the whole system. If income fluctuates, core position remains intact. Children learn to ask, if this goes wrong, what breaks? What stays? What remains under our control? This habit alone prevents catastrophic choices. Ego is managed early, not crushed, managed. Wealthy families understand that ego is expensive. It pushes people to act for appearance instead of outcome. So praise is measured. Criticism is private. Correction is calm. Children are not encouraged to perform publicly for validation. And they are encouraged to perform privately for competence. As adults, they do not need attention to feel secure. They are not provoked by disrespect. They are not rushed by comparison. This makes them difficult to manipulate. Long-term thinking is normalized, not as an abstract idea, but as a default setting. Children hear phrases like, "This doesn't matter yet." "This will matter later." "We're not in a hurry." Time is treated as depth, not pressure. This creates a sense of positioning instead of urgency. Most people rush because they feel behind. Wealthy families move slowly because they feel placed. Another critical distinction becomes clear. Wealth is not stored, it is structured. Money sitting idle is exposed. Money inside systems is resilient. So children observe that the same amount of money behaves very differently depending on how it is held, protected, and positioned. They learn that size matters less than structure, control matters more than accumulation. This understanding prevents obsession with numbers. They focus instead on durability. Failure, when it happens, is not treated as identity. It is treated as information. What did this reveal? What changes next time? Children learn to separate who they are from what happened. This creates resilience without arrogance. They are not broken by loss. They are not inflated by success. Both are temporary. By adulthood, the outcome of this conditioning is clear. The calm is trained. The patience is trained. The restraint is trained. What outsiders mistake for confidence is often familiarity. Familiarity with systems, familiarity with consequences, familiarity with control. Wealthy families do not aim to win every moment. They aim to remain positioned. This explains why wealth often disappears when conditioning disappears. Money without structure is fragile. Opportunity without discipline evaporates. Power without restraint attracts destruction. What wealthy families pass down is not just assets. It is judgment. It is timing. It is silence. It is the ability to wait without weakening. Once this becomes clear, the way you see the world changes. You stop asking, "How do I make more money?" and start asking, "Where does leverage actually sit?" What decisions protect position? What structures survive mistakes? You stop chasing attention. You start protecting optionality. You stop trying to win quickly. You start trying to stay in the game. That shift is quiet, but it is permanent. This is wealthy family secrets, where the most important rules are not explained loudly, not written publicly, and not rewarded immediately. They are passed down quietly, noticed slowly, and understood deeply by those paying attention.